Hey, this is another interview on the topic of NEETdom that I had with somebody from Asia, from Malaysia to be more specific. And he's a bit younger and he doesn't open up so much about his personal life, but still I think we cover some very interesting topics like genetics and how they play into being a NEET, but also how society views needs and how to find happiness and if we even can become happy and how we can have more self-confidence being a need. So enjoy, and please don't forget to subscribe and leave comments if you enjoyed it. So thanks. So first of all, thank you so much for being here and taking the time for having this chat. And I thought at the beginning, maybe you could give like a few details about your background that you're comfortable sharing.
I mean, growing up, I was kind of normal. I never thought about being a NEET or even being interested about being a NEET. Uh, it's just that I didn't have like a good time growing up, so I I throughout my teenage life, I'm kind of the social outcast, you would say. It's not completely like rejected by people where I have no interaction with people. People still find me enjoyable to um have a conversation with. It's just that I don't really get connected with people that much. For examples, like um I don't um I don't come across as a polite person, and I kept very quiet despite being in a group places. And I'm also not really particularly competent in what I do. So for example, my grades are not very good, my sports isn't very good, and I wasn't the first choice of anyone. Like
Okay,
I say that, could you understand?
I
Like
can understand that. Yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't the first choice or even the top 10 choices. I'm like always the last few choices in every place that I go. When you're growing when you're growing up, you feel like you have been underachieving and that you're not doing as well as everyone else, and then you feel like at the same time you have that anxiety where do people really like you or do they secretly hate you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then you kind of give yourself like reasons not to do things, and it kind of just go down the hill.
hmm
Yeah.
I guess everybody has that feeling that maybe secretly people don't really like you so much, but I
Yeah,
get where
it's
you're
kind
coming
of
from.
insecurity. Then I also have to add that in my personal life, as in my family isn't exactly very stable either, and uh, I guess that's kind of contributed to my incompetency because my parents don't really ask for anything out of me. They don't have any expectations on me, and they didn't even try to raise me. So I wasn't educated about manners and this kind of stuff that I have to essentially just figure it out everything by myself. It's like if I go out and take drugs and do alcohol and join a gang, they wouldn't have cared. So it's kind of like um, I could have been anyone that I wanted. Like I really could have been anyone that I wanted.
Okay, so your
Yeah.
parents kind of abandoned you in a way, or they didn't spend so much time with you?
I wouldn't say it's abandon, it's like neglect.
Yeah, neglected you. Yeah, that's the right word. Were they working most of the time, or did they just not care so much?
Uh, no, my parents have their own issues, but financially we are comfortable until a certain point.
Yeah, I think one point that's also noteworthy in this context is, if you're fine with me sharing this, you are from the Asian region.
That I'm from Malaysia.
Exactly. Okay, you're
Um,
from Malaysia. But
yes.
in this regard, I guess cultural expectations of you succeeding are probably even more strict than, let's say, in Europe, or maybe even more than in the US. Because in the US, it's always known, and I know some people there who are Asian or who know Asian people. They are very ambitious, and there are
It
these tiger mamas who basically push their kids to always go to Harvard and become lawyers and doctors or engineers. And I could imagine that maybe your parents didn't enforce that so much on you, but still you feel culturally that this is influencing you. Is that possible?
Uh, yes, it's what you said. There's a cultural factor to it, but even then, I wasn't that quite affected by the culture. It's that it's more about I have the sense of um, competitive. I have the competitive spirit that I have to be good at something, and if I wasn't good at something, then I'll feel disappointed in myself. It's no one else is disappointed about me.
Hmm.
It's
So you
more
you are
about
your
me.
own worst critic in a way.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think that's probably, I'm also a bit of a perfectionist. And this is why I actually generally had kind of good grades at school, but that doesn't mean so much. And it actually made my life worse. And I have the tendency, which is also not good for my life quality, to worry way too much. I
Mm.
worry a lot about my grades back in the day, and now I worry about my CV not looking as good as it should. And this can be beneficial because you're going to study harder before tests, but it can also be a detriment to your general well-being and happiness because you're going to worry about everything too much. But yeah, let's maybe talk a bit about what you did after school. So you finished high school, is that fair to say?
Yes, I finished high school, and um, right after I finished high school, it was actually like the one of the lowest point for me because my 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 mom is like kind of being suicidal, and then our finance are collapsing, and that's why I went to an through like an employment and education. So I kind of like displaced from society by chance. I mean, I actually, but the thing is that these are not very, it's not the most uncommon things. There are also people who are in similar situation, but who end up coming up ahead in this situation. So,
Uh-huh.
in a sense where, you know, I could have like worked for someone and then support myself and then made things better during this year, but I wasn't. I was being a NEET. So in a sense, you could say that I'm being a disappointment
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't
during
say
that time.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this could be an interesting topic to kind of dive into maybe a bit later about, are you a disappointment if you are a need? Are
Mm-hmm.
you worth anything if you don't contribute to society by working a normal 9 to 5 job, or a 7 to 8 job, whatever kind of job you might have? And
Yeah.
I think society is skewed a bit in the way that we only value a certain type of life story, or like path. At the same time, one point that's also interesting, you said that your mom had some psychological issues, and this is an interesting pattern that I see over and over. Because I had a conversation with somebody from the Czech Republic, and he said his mother was also kind of a shut-in and a NEET, you could say. And I guess the other guy from the US I talked to also had, I think,
Well.
his mother or father was also a bit like having issues. And for me, I can also say my father is pretty much introverted and worrying a
Mm.
lot. So I'm not saying stuff is predetermined, but that's a pattern I see over and over, is that
It.
certain mental conditions are inherited. And this is why, could maybe explain why you're struggling in life, because you basically have the same genes as your mom, and you're going to be on average unhappier than somebody with perfect genes. Does it make
Mm.
sense?
Yes, it does make sense to an extent, but I wouldn't want to attribute the genetic factor very much into this into your psychology, um, because in a sense it also gives you the reason or excuse to not do something for yourself, and I don't want that.
Yeah, you're
And
right. And
yeah, and by the way, I don't have a lot in common with my mother because both of us are not very connected together. I don't get to pick up her habits, and she wasn't there to correct my habits.
I
Yeah.
understand. Okay.
So
Yeah.
so so if you're talking about the similarities between like the parent and child, it's because they have that it could be because they were together for a long time, but for my situation it was different. So you could
Exactly.
also explain this as to why I might not necessarily be the same as my mother.
Yeah, you're right. But I think there are some people and some experts, so-called, even that say that everything how we turn out is just a result of our nurture, i.e., how we're being raised by our parents. That means if like a guy becomes a criminal and shoots people, it's just because he was raised in a bad community. But the real biologists basically found out that this is not entirely true, that at least 50% of how we turn out is actually our genes. And I don't want to be like negative in any way. All I'm
Hmm.
saying is, even though you weren't raised by your mother, the fact that you have the genes from her is also playing a big role maybe in how your brain chemistry is wired nowadays. And this is kind of a sad thing to think about because we want to have the freedom to mold our lives in the best way possible. But
Hmm.
you kind of got the software in your brain from your parents. And if one is a bit of a shitty and buggy software, it's going to be hard to run like a perfect program on it. You get what
Yeah,
I'm
but
saying?
see, from the way that I think about this issue is that is that it could be true, but by believing some an information as this, does it cause you to act differently, or do you still have the desire to change something? Because when I was when I was struggling, I kind of gave myself a lot of excuses, and the kind of things of the kind of excuses as to not try or give reasons as to why I don't deserve to be as good as someone else, or that I don't feel entitled to the same kind of success that other people have. And these are the little things that ended up contributing to my lack of competence, or and also the situation of being a loser, that kind of thing. So I feel that by talking myself out of um, this kind of subjects, right, it does give you like a bit of control as to, you know, do something for yourself.
I agree. I think it's a good point, and there's no black and white. And obviously, if you read in the subreddit of NEETs or in the subreddit of incels or other of these or feminists, there's probably going to be more of the victim role, especially in the US. It's pretty popular right now, saying, I'm
Yes.
this and that, I'm black, I'm Native American,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
a woman.
So this
And
thing,
yeah,
excuse me if I interrupt. So
sure.
this thing that I like to add is that even though the Western are becoming more educated, right? They are also becoming more educated at identifying themselves. And by identifying yourselves, right, doesn't mean that you have to behave or fall into the category. So it's like by identifying yourself as this, you're giving yourself the excuse to behave the way they behave, and that is something that I don't encourage myself to do, which is why I refuse um, to accept or identify that genetics has a lot to do with my situation, or that the environment has a lot to do with my situation.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think what's happening in the US, like identifying with like being a woman or being black as the end all be all, that's kind of racist or sexist. I think that's kind of stupid. And saying, "Oh, you're white, that's why you have white privilege," that's kind of stupid as well. But it doesn't really concern me so much because I'm in Europe myself and you're in Malaysia. So I guess we have a bit less of that, I guess. And I also want to point out one anecdote that still maybe is an interesting side note. I have a very good friend from childhood. And like you, he always said, "I'm not going to try to be like my parents and my siblings because his parents are pretty much shut ins and kind of weirdos. And his older brother is basically still living at home and he's definitely he has a work, but he's very socially awkward and he's probably a virgin. And his sister also is very shy and anxious, and he always tried to be the cool guy and he was going out and he tried flirting with women and he did his best to live like the coolest life possible and be totally normal. But now it turns out that he's like 27 or something and he started a
Mm.
job. He kind of started to break down. And it was kind of weird because it always seemed like he was the outlier in the family. He had a okay job and he had some success with women,
Mm-hmm.
but for some reason he couldn't cope with work anymore. He kind of had a burnout and he had to leave his work almost. And now he's oftentimes writing to me that he's so depressed and the fact that he can't get with women. And just as an anecdotal evidence that kind of your shitty genetic program, even though you act like you're totally normal, will maybe get back to you at some point. I don't know. I don't want to be deterministic at all. I just see it in his case. He definitely has these genes of being overly pessimistic and even depressive. And he talks about suicide and stuff now, even though technically he has a very good education, he had a good job, and he was partying, but still somehow his defective, shitty, buggy program kind of caught up with him, which doesn't mean at all that you can't make it out of it. I mean, sometimes for some people it makes them stronger, it makes them better. But all I'm saying is, I think it can also be valuable to kind of accept the cards you've been dealt, because you're not going to be surprised when something like this happens. Because this guy, he calls me up and he says, "I don't know what's going on. I'm so stressed and I can't sleep." And I tell him, "I know what's going on." I mean, it's basically it's in your genes, but also you're kind of an anxious guy. So I think the fact that he doesn't at all get what is happening to him and isn't
Mm-hmm.
able to find strategies to maybe get out of it and manage this kind of difficult state he's in makes it even harder for him, because he doesn't even recognize the fact that he has the predisposition for this.
Like, okay, if I have to view it from my perspective, I feel that it is less about, it has less to do with the genes, but rather the experience that he has. Because you mentioned that he grows up with in a very negative environment, so
Yeah.
there isn't enough positive experience for him to relate to, and that's
Hmm.
why he feel like positive the positivity is the um, end goal that he's supposed to reach, and then he's not reaching, which kind of suggests that um, he's he's not doing the right thing. But it's just because he wasn't exposed enough to the good things, and that's why he doesn't know how to um, reproduce the good things for himself.
That's one
I
part
mean
of the
that's
equation. Yeah.
yeah, that's how I see it, and I don't really understand your friend very well. So what you say could also have some merit behind it.
Yeah. All I'm
Yeah.
saying is, so basically they did twin studies and they put one of the twins in another family that, let's say, was super positive, but still the twin in the super positive family still turned out to show similar traits as the one who stayed in the negative family. And this is what I'm saying is, you can put this guy who was in this more negative, anxious family in a perfect positive family, but still it shows nowadays that over 50% of like your character and your personality is being shaped by your genetics. So this doesn't mean it has to be this way. It just shows that sometimes even the perfect upbringing doesn't change the fact that something is a certain way in your brain. And it doesn't have to be bad necessarily. I mean, it can also be that you're very artistic and you're very creative, and it maybe just means you're more of an introvert. And apparently it also increases with age. So the older you get, the more you kind of get close to your real personality. That's what research found nowadays. But yeah, maybe let's close this topic. I think it's very interesting. And I guess it's a pattern that I see. And sometimes I feel like the anonymous alcoholics, that's a program in the US that people who are alcoholics kind of have to go through. And it's kind of effective. And the first thing they do is they say, I admit that I have a problem. And I think for some people, it might be valuable to say that actually, because many people who are NEETs or MGTOWs or incels are maybe delusional, and they always say, "Oh no, I don't have a problem," and or I don't know, I'm just I can't understand why I'm this way. And so maybe the first step is to actually say, I acknowledge that maybe I have certain issues that are given to me due to my upbringing, but also due to my genes, and now I'm trying to change it. Does that make sense to you a bit?
It doesn't make a lot of sense, because if you have to put it in another way, is that there could be really successful parents who end up giving birth to loser childrens, which how do I explain this? Because how to say this? I also know people who grew up in like a very successful family, but then they end up becoming like um, really negative people who avoids responsibility consistently and doesn't want to do many more to their lives, and they are basically being entitled people. You could say that it is because their parents
Mm-hmm.
spoiled their children, and that's why they end up becoming um, this kind of loser kids. The thing is that if your genetic theory is correct, or is follow according to the research, they should have grown up to become someone as ambitious and powerful and very driven people, exactly the same as their parents, and yet they are not. So
That's true, but I mean, statistically, you have to look at the entire population. If you
yes,
look at children from successful parents, on average, they will be also have a higher IQ and be more conscientious. But obviously, you're right. There are parents who completely spoil their kids or who completely neglect their kids, even though they are successful themselves. Plus, there is the factor that genetics is a lottery still, and that even two perfect sets of chromosomes and DNA can still somehow lead to some fucked up chromosomes in a way, and you can't really explain that. But on average, you can clearly see that high IQ people will lead to high IQ people also, and something like being very hardworking, you will
yeah.
pass it on to your kids.
Also,
But
I would like to add is that maybe you're seeing that genetic has a lot to do with the upbringing of a child is due to the omitted variable bias. So what the omitted variable bias that I'm trying to um, point out is that maybe that you are a spoiled kid, you're a spoiled kid with a rich parents. But the thing is that because you have a rich parents, you kind of have the responsibility, or how to say this, the expectations that you have
yeah,
to be, you also have to be successful as their parents, and that kind of
yeah,
somehow reinforces their behaviors. And at the same time, if you put it in another way, we have kids that are given birth by loser parents. I mean, I call it loser parents for um, easier purposes. Um, so
sure.
so the loser parents, they give birth to their children. So the children kind of um, grew up together with a parents that is not overachieving, and that's so they don't see the responsibility or the expectations that they should be better than their parents, and that kind of also has the effect on their behavior.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think to maybe close off this topic a bit, I think multiple variables go into how you turn out. It's definitely not black and white. There's a gray area, but what more and more science now finds out is that genetics is a much higher degree than we thought initially. But we shouldn't use that as an excuse to say, oh yeah, my father was like this. My father was a wife beater and an alcoholic. Now I have to beat a wife as well and become an alcoholic. That's obviously not helpful. What I think is helpful is the perspective to see, okay, maybe I have been dealt cards that are not optimal, and maybe I have certain parts in my brain that somehow work in a certain way. For example, for me, I always have the tendency to be anxious and worry too much. I worry a lot how people perceive me, and this can be very annoying in a social setting. And me knowing this can be productive because I can think of strategies. And sometimes when the voice in my head comes and says you suck or you should be like this, then I can find strategies to cope with this. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, let's maybe go on. One point that you said initially, which I found interesting, was that you said that you weren't really able to connect with people. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on this? Is it more that you don't find people that have commonalities with you, or is it more that you generally have a hard time socializing with people?
Mm, how to say this? Socializing has been easier for me nowadays because I understand um, how being sociable works. Before, I didn't have any clue of socializing, and making friends back then is kind of like a chance, the person who just happened to sit right next to you um, became your best friend, or the person that just um, you happen to meet in the same bus stop and you see them every day, and that you kind of become close to them, and this kind of things, which um, back then I wasn't smart enough to figure out how to socialize. So the connection wasn't there if you're slightly different. But then now I could, like, how to say this, mm, talk to people naturally just fine, and that is because I went through a few social lessons through the internet, and that's why I was able to um, connect with people at least on the surface level or the professional level. In terms of like very intimate relationship, I wasn't able to do any of those because in a sense, I mean, if I have to describe it, I would say it's more of a timing thing, you know. uh, Maybe I've went through a lot more and much sooner than a typical person, and that's why people are not couldn't connect to me that soon because they
Hmm.
couldn't relate to this kind of things happening in their life. So in a sense, they're kind of ignorant in their society or their future.
Okay,
So yeah,
understand.
this is the connection that I wasn't able to have.
Okay, I get it. Do you think you fall like on the Asperger's spectrum? I don't have the impression because I think you're very articulate and you listen well and it's easy to communicate with you. But from what I read, and there's a lot of people who like have ADD or Asperger's, and this is why they have a hard time to really communicate with people in their early days. Did you hear about those ailments?
Yes, I come across terms like this, and I would say that pretty I'm kind of a fast learner. It's like I've been out of touch with society for 17 years, and I was somehow able to get back without anyone new in my life notice about that. So it in a sense it already suggests me or proved to me that I was able to learn quick enough to, you know, get back into the social game.
That's interesting. Okay. And you said you've been out of touch with society. What do you mean by that?
Okay, well, first of all, since when I was growing up, I was kind of neglected by my parents, so I wasn't able um, to talk or interact with the adult world. And at the same time, when I was a kid, I didn't really have a lot in common with other kids because maybe other kids do like sports or watch cartoons and this kind of stuff, or they go to classes together,
Mhm.
and I wasn't doing any of those, or I wasn't doing as much as them. And that's why it kind of stunted me in terms of that kind of social connection with the people in my demography during that time.
Yeah, okay, I understand. I mean,
Yeah, and at the
what
same
I,
time, I also want to add is that I was super religious back then. So the only thing that is going on for me was doing religion stuff, and I kind of get way too deep into religion that I couldn't even relate to typical normal religion. I guess maybe it was a cult, but I was not so sure right now.
I think maybe to share my perspective a bit, I also approximately 6 years ago, when I was your age, I would say, when I was still studying, I also
Hello.
already felt like I wasn't really belonging in society, and that I felt alienated from society in a way. And I even made a video about this on the podcast, where I kind of share my thoughts about how I don't feel like I'm normal in society. Because, for instance, most things that people enjoy doing, I don't really enjoy. I don't enjoy going on vacation so much. I don't enjoy sitting on the beach so much. I generally don't enjoy superficial conversations. I don't like to talk about the weather. I don't like to talk about like boring work related stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, this is why it's also pretty tough for me to talk to my parents, because they always ask the same questions, but they want to have a phone conversation like once a month, and I generally try to block it. And
Oh.
it's not that I'm unable to connect with people. Actually, I think I have pretty good empathy,
Mm-hmm.
but it's kind of tiring and it's not so interesting to me. So
So in a sense, you could also describe this as you are able to be more honest with yourself than the other people, because they will kind of have to put up with things that they don't like.
yeah, I think that's a good point, and maybe that's also kind of what I try to do with this conversation and in general, to give people a bit more self-confidence to live a bit differently. Because society in the West especially tells you, if you don't go to parties if you're young, or if you don't hook up all the time, or if
Mhm.
you don't have a normal job, then your life isn't worth anything. And
Yeah, it's like you are
yeah.
missing out a lot of the things, and these are the little things that are missing out are what makes you as a person, and that's kind of a bad narrative.
Exactly. And it seems like there's a list of things that you just have to check, like a checklist, like, okay, job, family, vacation, this, that, and then you're going to be happy. And to me, that's not true. Maybe it's true for some people, for some normies, as I call them. But for me, I know it from experience that a job doesn't make me happy. Having a girlfriend doesn't make me happy. Having, I don't know, hookups doesn't make me happy. And kind of like the realization that everything in the outer world is kind of overrated. And that sounds pretty jaded and depressing if you hear it first, but it can also be liberating, because you don't expect the outer world to make you happy. And that's kind of the problem I have with incels. I don't know if you know them on Reddit. They're
Yeah,
always very
I know.
vocal. Yeah, they always talk about, oh, if only I had a girlfriend, everything would be perfect. And I mean, I had a girlfriend now. I have had a girlfriend for 4 years, and it doesn't make my life much better. I'm not saying I don't love her, but it's just, I don't know, it doesn't doesn't solve my problems at all. It causes new problems, actually, mostly. Second of all, having a job and having a good pay, does it make me happy? Not at all. I mean, for me, it was mostly annoying to be in an open office. And all of the things that society tells you should make you happy didn't make me happy at all. And this is why I think it's not a bad thing to live differently and maybe even be shamed by society. Let's say you're a gamer who likes to stay at home and likes to play World of Warcraft or Fortnite or Apex Legends or whatever. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's a bad thing at all if you enjoy it. But at the same
Yeah,
time, it
but
seems most people can't enjoy it really. So that's a bit of a problem that we
I
have to
mean,
work
the
on.
thing that I want to add to your message is that um, during my experience as a loser, as a social loser, uh, it I kind of learned something is that we are actually kind of bad at deciding what makes us happy. I mean, we can't really answer that question ourselves, you know. So even though what you are feeling is that it makes you happy, it might not be the real thing. I mean, for instance, people get into addiction because they feel like doing something makes them happy, but when in reality it was just because of the chemistry that um when you're doing something, it your body outputs something like that in your body. So
Yeah.
um it's that society tells you what to be happy, and then you kind of disagree with it, but then at the same time you also can't really agree to what makes you happy, because you don't really understand what makes you happy either.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think I came to exactly the same realization that we as humans are very bad at predicting what makes us happy.
Mm.
And because we're so bad at it, we usually rely on the program that society gives us, like, okay, you're not happy. I guess you need a house to be happy. And this is, I think, what the incels are wrong about. They think
Yeah,
I'm not
so
happy
so so
right
it's
now.
kind of like, so it's like I'm not happy with myself right now, so what should I do with myself right now? Oh, the advertisement told me that I should have a car, so maybe I
Yeah,
should
yeah,
have a
yeah.
car. That kind of thing.
That's a good point. That basically capitalistic society reinforces that image that something is lacking in your life, and this is why you need something to fill that void. And honestly, it does sound a bit like Buddhist or whatever, woo woo. But to me, it's very true. The fact that you can't fill this void with anything in the outer world. And I think to maybe elaborate a bit on that point about happiness, for me, as soon as I knew that the things that society tells me or should make me happy don't make me happy at all, I had to figure out myself what makes me happy. And I kind of try to come up with my own philosophy. Obviously, I read a lot, and I noticed that it's pretty hard to make yourself really happy. Or let's say there's a base level of happiness that's 0, and it can go to -10 or something, and it can go to +10. The problem is it's super difficult to get up to +10. Probably you need to do drugs, heavy drugs, but then you're going to
Yeah,
crash down afterwards.
I
But
mean,
let's say you do something really cool, like having a great meal and a super date. That's maybe, to me, that's +2. Or having a great vacation and great sex, that's maybe +3, but it's going to be over in just an instant because you're just forgetting it just a second after you did
right.
it. That's true. And
So there's
yeah,
actually like academic study for this. It's called the hedonic treadmill. You could search
exactly.
this up on Google. Um,
Yeah.
this actually would take a very long discussion, so I would not want to go very deep to it. And it is also very, how to say this, not exactly very academic. So the things that they say might be mostly bullshit and might be mostly noise. I read about the story of Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great is kind of like a very respected historical figure. And then the thing that makes him different is that um, he is adventurous with his pleasures. Like he goes out with a lot of women also, and then he's powerful, and then he could do a lot of things with himself. But then when his empire collapsed, or when his army was failing or something like that, he is also okay without without his success.
Yeah, that's a
So
good point.
so it's an example that I find it very interesting, and what makes this person so legendary, or what
Mm.
makes this person such a unique, um why is he so unique, why is he so powerful, how did he become someone like that? Because it's like, um his happiness is not dependent on his status or his success. Even when he was failing, he is still comfortable with himself. And isn't that kind of the things that all of us should aspire to become?
That's a good point. And I think an even better example is probably Marcus Aurelius, who
Mm.
he has a book called Meditations, and he was like an emperor. He basically was the most powerful man in the world back then, and I think he was like the emperor of the Roman Empire or something like this. At least his books are really old, but they're very wise, and it's a prime example of Stoicism. So the idea is, okay, I have all these things, this power, but I'm not gonna let it get to my head, and I can rely on. I'm basically not trying to control everything around me. I already expect some people to be rude to me, and I try to have this kind of inner peace and stoicism that
Yeah.
doesn't get affected by all this.
So it gives me a question, is that, do they arrive to this kind of conclusion after they became someone really powerful, or do they, um, become someone really powerful because they arrive to this kind of conclusion first?
Yeah, I think probably both ways. The causality isn't very clear, but I think
Yeah.
one point also to elaborate a bit on is really the idea that having fame, having money, having success, and all the outer worldly pleasures and trophies that you could have doesn't really give you lasting fulfillment. And I think for me, I instinctively believed that to be true because you hear that quite a lot. I mean, you hear rich people saying being rich isn't the end all be all. And I always thought to myself at the beginning when I heard people, even now, like Tim Ferriss, for example, he's super successful and he has a really cool life. He has a podcast and he is well connected. Everybody reads his book and he can just chill and he has millions. But still, he talks about depression and stuff in his podcast. And I'm wondering, how is this even possible? Or there's people like H3,
Yeah.
Ethan Klein, and also he's super successful, but he talks about being depressed and trying everything, and now he's on antidepressants. And I'm also thinking like that's not logical at all. But at the same time, I really get it that okay, it isn't the end all be all. It's maybe to come back to my scale of happiness. Having this kind of success can even bring down your happiness. Or another example, PewDiePie. PewDiePie probably makes 100 million a year or 200 millions, but still, he is. I guess I'm happier than him because he has to make videos every day, and if you see him, you see that he's pretty stressed about his life and that he has to make videos every day and he's really scared about losing his empire that he built. And I think that I'm probably happier than PewDiePie. I can't say for sure, but the difference between myself and people in the NEET subreddit, I think, and people in the incel subreddit is that I really, really believe firmly that all these outer lanes and things that we think make us happy won't make us happy. I really believe somebody like PewDiePie when he says, I am not that happy. He made a video about this, which got kind of big. I don't know if you know him.
It's just that, how to say this, you know um happiness, right? I feel it's less of the objective but rather the byproduct of what we have been doing. So so maybe perhaps that, someone like PewDiePie, he wasn't that much concerned with his own happiness. He just wants to bring content, and consistently good one on top of that. So that kind of is his commitment that he has to put up. And even if he were to be less happy with himself, he is willing to be able to compromise for that.
Everything that you commit to is also your prison in a way. Like what I'm saying is PewDiePie, he basically committed to making a video every day. But at the same time, I imagine this is also torturing him. And the same as I have some friends who are entrepreneurs and they're pretty successful. But I notice how it's all day long, every day, they basically are preoccupied with their business and they think about it all the time, even on vacation, and they can't really relax. So, in a way, I think what we need to do is we have to find a balance and we have to learn from the Stoics also, because what they figured out already like 2, 3 thousand years ago is okay, maybe you should work on something, that's fine, but you shouldn't be so attached to the outcome. And that's also what the Buddhists say. You shouldn't have attachment to all these outer worldly things. But the problem is, if you're not attached to, let's say, becoming a doctor, you're not going to become a doctor. So you have to kind of, while becoming a doctor, you have to move out of that space of being not attached to being a doctor. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I kind of get what you're saying, but at the same time, I also have my skepticism to the Buddhist narrative that you shouldn't have any attachment to it, because um, first of all, the Buddhists probably might not know what they're talking about exactly, or maybe they mean something else, but then our present day we interpret it as something else. um, so the lack of attachment causes you to not achieve something, might be true or it might be false, we wouldn't know, because the source was way too far ago, the information. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
Yeah. All I can say is we probably can learn something from the Stoics, but also from the Buddhists. It kind of depends on where you are. If you're a super successful entrepreneur already, then it's good to maybe tone it down a bit for the sake of your own happiness and say, okay, I'm not going to be attached to my business making even billions of dollars. And let's say, for example, coming back to PewDiePie, he's always using this T-series thing as a motivator, but obviously it's useful to him. But you shouldn't be focused on having more subscribers than T-series. I mean, that's just one prime example. I mean, you already make hundreds of millions. You should just say,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, that's tier series is gonna have more subscribers than me. I guess he uses it as a marketing plot for getting more subs. That's fine. But all I'm saying is that could be a good example for an entrepreneur who already has millions. He shouldn't be so attached to getting even more millions. But on the other side, there's the NEETs who don't do anything. Maybe they shouldn't read too many Buddhists who say just chill, and they shouldn't smoke weed all the time probably, because they're gonna get even more lazy and even less productive. And that's a way that's also doesn't make us really happy. I mean, that's maybe something that you also noticed, and the NEETs
Yeah.
I've been talking to is that just having too much free time isn't necessarily the paradise on earth. Play like the 20th game, or if you watch the 30th anime in this week, you're not going to get a lot of satisfaction and pleasure out of it.
Yes, correct. How do I say this? There's a lot of, because how to say this, because we have a lot of time, we get to think a lot of other things that a typical person might not have the chance to think about. But at the same time, we also have to, like, we also have to consider that um, a lot of what we think are also noises that wouldn't amount to something that is very useful. It wouldn't amount to the information wouldn't amount or solve any real problems, and therefore, um, it wouldn't it be kind of beneficial if we focus more in, like, the established ideas? So so in a sense, we don't try to be too different from um, how a normal person should behave, or how a person should normally think. That kind of suggestion is it. I mean, it gave me ideas like this before.
Yeah, sure. One point that I found interesting when I heard you talk is that you said about yourself that you are very incompetent and that you are kind of a failure. I thought this was very harsh language when talking about yourself, and probably the voice in your head is even more harsh. What makes you think that you're such a failure? I mean, your English is really good, for instance. So I don't know. You probably could use this intelligence that you have and this analytical skills for something. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned I was a failure, but that wasn't exactly like how to say this. It was the historical evidence that I wasn't able to keep up with the standards, and that's why I describe myself as a social failure. But if I have to, but for me personally, I don't actually feel very much that way, because how how do I put this? Um, the reason why I attach the label social failure to my identity when I'm presenting my character to you is because I didn't have a lot to show in my resume. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. But for me personally, I wasn't disappointed with myself, in a sense that I don't feel myself as a failure, and that I still have confidence in the things that I do, is because I did enough for myself, and I kind of trust the things that I do is um, is kind of correct, or how to say this, um, it follows a discipline, and that's why I feel assured or secured with the things that I do and the things that I say.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
I'm saying is you have to be careful, and I think a lot of other people, I'm sure, are also falling victim to this strategy that our brain has to always be overly critical of ourselves. I mean, I
uh,
heard somewhere we probably wouldn't even talk to our worst enemies like we talk about ourselves in our own brain. And I have the same problem. I mean, I have to be careful
I
about
mean,
how I
like
speak to myself.
how do I put this? I used to feel the same way as you described like a few years ago. Back then when I wasn't back then when I wasn't that understanding to my own self, where I was still trying to figure myself out. And then because I couldn't figure myself out, I took other people as the benchmark to compare myself with. And that's
Yeah.
why I feel like disappointment. But then there's this question that I find it really, really interesting to ask yourself, for everyone, is that where does your confidence come from?
Mhm.
Where does his confidence come from? And then you start to learn a lot more about why people do what they are doing. So the person that always talks very loudly, the person who is really arrogant with the way he speaks, the it could be his confidence was because that he's rich, he has money, and then his genetics come by easily for him, and that's why he feels so secure with himself that he could get away being arrogant.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the examples. And then there's another person where why is he feeling like, what makes this person confident with himself? Like where does he get his confidence from? Maybe he gets his confidence from the shirt that he wears, that if he's not wearing this shirt he doesn't feel like himself, and that's why he needs this shirt to go out to the public. That's why he needs to put up the makeup on when she goes to the public, because she requires the makeup to build her confidence. And yeah, that's the kind of um, answers that you could get out of people, and then you could learn about why people do what they do.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, do you have an answer to where does your confidence come from?
Where does my confidence come from? Well, first of all, I'm a curious person. I'm willing to go through a lot of things to dig up the information that I need to understand things better. And at the same time, I also have confidence in my doubts. in the sense where, you know, the things that were presented to me might not necessarily be the truth, or I shouldn't accept this right away until I have enough evidence for this. And that that kind of requires a discipline, and I kind of like have confidence with the discipline that I've been doing on myself. So these are the things that build my confidence, and there are also things that makes me lose confidence is when I wasn't doing enough for myself, when I feel like I could have done it better but I
Mhm.
didn't, due to maybe my laziness, my weakness, the kind of little things that I allow myself to be influenced by the voice of other people, and that's why I change my decision. And when I realize it, I will lose confidence. These are, yeah, the examples.
I think that's a good assessment and it's realistic. And I think you're right. I think life is a lot about confidence and self-confidence and having the balls basically to say, okay, this is how I'm gonna live my life. And I'm not
Yeah.
gonna let anybody else tell me
The
what I'm
thing about
supposed to live like.
the thing about this kind of confidence is that it could be easily mistaken in many other ways. So for instance, there are, you know, examples of people who are literally incompetent in every aspect that they do, and yet they somehow have the loudest voice. And you kind of how to say this, you kind of look down on these people.
Yeah, it's
And
kind of naive and kind of
you see people like,
delusional.
yeah, you see people like this in society, and then everyone kind of disagrees there, and then they somehow feel like, you know what, it's because people are not smart enough, or um people people are stupid, they can't see me as the person that I am. So these are the dangers that you could have for having
Yeah,
too much confidence in yourself. Yeah, this
yeah.
kind of things.
Yeah, society also kind of respects these kind of people who carve their own way, I think. People like rock stars, people like, I don't know, Hugh Hefner. He has a very sinful life in a way. I mean, many people would disagree with what he did, like having a Playboy mansion and everything, but he was pretty unapologetic. He said, that's my life and that's how I'm choosing to live. And I think people in general, even some will be jealous and some people will disagree with the choices, will still have some respect if you stand behind your decision. And also, I respect people who say, I devote my life to religion fully. I respect people who say, I devote my life to making money. That's fine as well. And I also respect people who devote their life to a family and be a stay-at-home mom or dad. But the problem nowadays is also maybe due to social media. We always see the opportunity cost. We always feel like, oh, something is wrong because I'm feeling something inside of me that's wrong. And I think that's also one of the biggest problems ever, but also nowadays, especially, that's the problems that the incels have. That's the problem that the needs have. It's the problem that, okay, these people live their lives, but they feel like something is wrong with them. Like they're not happy really. Or at least, yeah, they get the feeling like, okay, why am I feeling kind of uneasy? It must be because I don't have a job, or it must be because I don't have fame or something like this. But I
Yeah.
think
So
mostly these answers are probably wrong. They're probably only one small part of the equation, I think.
yeah, so the way you describe it is that because these people are not confident with themselves, is
Yeah.
because they outsource their confidence to materials. Like for instance, I need this fame to have confidence in me, because the fame gives me the assurance, the security that I'm accepted by other people. That's why I could feel good about myself. But if people don't feel good about me, I couldn't feel good about myself. That is not the correct narrative. And
Exactly.
similarly, a person who outsourced um his confidence to, like, let's say, his Mercedes Benz. So he feels good because he drives a Mercedes Benz, and then people also kind of gives him opportunity because they see him with a Mercedes Benz. But the thing is that if he loses his Mercedes Benz, he would lose his confidence, because his confidence was derived from the Mercedes Benz, and that's why um, there's there's a danger with relying on material stuff to build your confidence. Yeah, and then I also want to add is a quote from a movie, the Spider-Man Homecoming. Have you watched the movie before?
No, I haven't. I just know the soundtrack.
Right. So there's
No,
this
actually,
quote.
I have watched it. I think it's the one with the young actor, right? With the
Yeah,
one who looks like 12.
the
Yeah,
young Spider-Man. So it's that,
yeah,
when Tony Stark refused to give the main character his suit, he was
yeah,
like, you know what? I need that suit because if he doesn't have a suit, he is nothing. So so Tony replied to the young actor, which is that if you are nothing without the suit, you don't deserve the suit. So it is applicable to our scenario is that if you are nothing without your money, without your fame, you don't deserve your money and fame.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point. And what I wanted to add as well, one thing that is maybe even more common for women is to attach their self-worth to their beauty. Because, and also for men, obviously, but a lot of women, they feel like as soon as they get a bit older, or if they don't very much comply to society's standards of being pretty and tall and slim and having big boobs, they feel very bad. And especially with social media, they see these perfect models, they're going to compare themselves to them. And I think you can apply this to a lot of things, like having a girlfriend. Oh, I just
Yeah.
missed this girlfriend. If I had this girlfriend, everything would be nice. But this is just not the case. And maybe coming back to being a NEET, I think this is one of the main issues I see is like NEETs feeling like I need to have a career and I'm not a worthwhile person. I'm a failure. I don't know, incompetent because I don't have the regular life that other peers have. I think that's dangerous, and I think it's not valuable. I think it's good
Yeah.
to, if you want to change it, you can change it. But if you kind of enjoy staying at home and if you find a way to maybe cover your costs of living, then
Mm.
why shouldn't you live like this? And I think eventually people should become much more self-confident.
I'm from an developing Asian country, and so we, the unemployed people, don't necessarily feel as bad as an unemployed person in a developed countries, because from what I see is that these needs are more commonly um, identified in developed countries such as Japan, America, and the Europe.
Yeah,
So, but in Asian countries, it's different. Is that you could be okay without any job, but then if you don't have a job, people don't really give people don't really give you much expectation, and they don't necessarily go out of their way to make you feel bad, and you don't necessarily have to go out of your way to make yourself feel bad. In Asian situations, is what I'm
that's an
trying
interesting
to.
perspective. Okay,
Yeah.
because I think in the West it's pretty much shunned upon, and I think it's a
Yeah,
common
but
understanding
how to
that
say this? It is still a very common and accepted way to say that this is not a very good way to live.
sure, sure. And
Yeah.
I mean, like 20 years ago, but still today, most women were housewives and mothers, and you could say these were needs as well in a way. But they had something in their life. They had a purpose, which was raising the kids and cooking and cleaning the house, which people were totally fine with. And this is also an interesting topic, I think, is that it's always a matter of your expectation and the cultural expectation. Like 20 years ago, it was totally fine for a woman to just be a housewife, but now it's almost in the West, it's like, oh, you're only a housewife. Why are you only a housewife? And then you should have a career and fulfill yourself. But most people realize that having a career isn't that fulfilling, and maybe being a housewife and raising kids is much more fulfilling. And I'm not saying that the woman has to be the housewife, the man can take that role as well. But this is something I think that there has to be more understanding in the West, at least, for different ideas on how to live your life. And I think, yeah, we can do a better job of also being happier about the time we have, because when I look around in the subreddit of NEETs, many of them are very depressed and unhappy because they let their mind torture them, and they get into the spiral of consuming too much media and gaming too much, and then they become very depressed. But yeah, I think we've been talking for almost 1 hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. Maybe one final thing that would be interesting to me is you seem to be pretty optimistic. Can you maybe just close, if you have a vision for your life for the next 5 years? Do you have anything that you could imagine doing as a job, quote unquote? Or maybe if you don't want to answer this, did you find anything in life that gives you meaning, or
I
that
mean,
could give you meaning?
how to say this? The way I think is very different from the way I think like 5 years ago. So I don't actually like the idea of having a future future plan. Uh, but how to say this? I wouldn't say that me being optimistic is the right word, because optimistic people could also be delusional.
Yeah.
You're following? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I could say is that build yourself a habit that does something for yourself. I mean, um, by following through the habit, right? You you kind of make yourself, you kind of force yourself into doing something very similar, something like a routine, but and it might feel very uncomfortable, or maybe you might question, like, this is not a happy way to live, but it does stop you from feeling bad about yourself, and that kind of is good enough for me.
Yeah. So do
Yeah,
you have
so
something that you're planning to do, like as a routine?
the only plan that I have as a routine is to wake up and sleep at a consistent hour, and mm, talk to other people and learn about the things that I've been usually learning, and be uh, constantly open for opportunities. Like, I kind of leave a lot up to my judgment. So I wouldn't say that I have a very complicated process.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's about it.
Okay, but you don't really have a specific plan for looking for a job, or trying to get another education or something. You're more or less right now trying to figure out what you enjoy doing and being
Well,
creative and learning.
how to say this? I Right now, I feel that it is important for me to be really good at what I've been doing right now. So it does open a lot of doors to other places, and then even if the doors are not open, um, I could always easily open the doors by myself.
Okay, okay, I get
Yeah.
it. So, um, I think this was very interesting. Maybe as a general note, I think what you said about having a routine and being productive for part of the day is really important. As I said initially, I think there's going to be more and more needs in this society. I think I just recently heard a podcast by Joe Rogan and some other guy who runs for a candidate. He's actually Asian, and he's running for the Democrats, and he wants to have a universal basic income. But basically, his main thesis is that due to automation and AI and everything being more and more taken over by robots, there's going to be millions of jobs that are going to be cut, like truck drivers and in retail and call center workers. These are basically 50% of all jobs in the US currently, and also in every other country. So there's not going to be that many new jobs as like logistics specialists and IT specialists that these people will be able to fill. So these people will become needs as well at some point. And now the question is, will they be committing suicide? Or will they find a way to give their life purpose and meaning? And I hope the latter is the case, that they can find a way to give their life some meaning. And I think it's possible. I think we have to change our narrative about what a life worth living is. And if somebody just enjoys himself playing games all day, raising kids all day, that's great. But usually I think you need some component where you feel like I'm doing something productive or something helpful. Why not do something productive? Like going to a nursing home and talking to some sick people, or just reaching out to people who need help, or reaching out to people who just to friends and keeping in touch, or maybe programming a game, learning a new skill. All these could be things that could be worthwhile, and you don't have to do them all day, maybe 4 hours a day, and then your life will be much more pleasurable, instead of just waking up and then going on Reddit and then watching porn and then gaming all day. Because for me, at least, I'm not feeling great after a day like this.
Yeah, I mean, we all have like our own personal compass as to what feels good for us and what feels bad for us. So as long as we take action fast enough when we are feeling bad, we will generally be okay with ourselves. That's the simple answer that I could give.
Yeah, exactly. Great. So, do you have any other parting words or questions or topics that you still want to address?
Well, I don't have anything specific in my mind. Uh,
No, that's fine. You don't have to do anything. We can also have a round two and chat again. So, thank you very much for this conversation. It was really interesting to hear your
yeah, right. Thank you
perspective.
to you.